Joining us now is Republican Senator from West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito, one of the 74 members of the Senate who stayed up late to vote in favor of the $1.2 trillion spending bill and avoiding a government shutdown. Joining us from her hometown of Charleston, West Virginia. Senator, welcome. Before we get to the shutdown drama, I do want to get your reaction to what happened in Moscow and how this might affect U.S. policy as it relates to our situation in Ukraine and funding and all of that.
Well, obviously, it's horrifying to think what's happened to the Russian people going to a concert innocently gunned down by a terrorist part of ISIS. It tells us one thing: ISIS is not fully disintegrated. It tells us that every nation, and Russia in particular, is very vulnerable right now. You know, Putin just got reelected by overwhelming margins, and this happens to him showing his own vulnerabilities. And I think that's got to be very much a blow, not just to the Russian people, but to the leadership there. I think he's trying to blame Ukraine, but that dog don't hunt. It's not working. And I think that, you see all the pressures in the region, but I think it further shows us the weakness of Putin and his regime in Russia.
So the concern that many have is that because Putin is, just as you described, in a weakened condition, that he may intensify the fight against Ukraine, looking for wins wherever he can. And we're hearing reports about a stepped-up offensive there. Looking ahead to the coming weeks, when we talk about U.S. funding for allies in Ukraine or Israel or border security, given how hard it was to get the basic work of funding the government done, what are the prospects? How optimistic are you on these thornier questions that divide both parties?
Well, I think this does show that strengthening and keeping Ukraine in the fight to further weaken Putin shows you however important that is. I voted to move forward with continuing to support Ukraine, to keep him out of NATO countries, to weaken Putin's army and his country, and to support a democracy such as Ukraine. So I am for that. I hope that the House can figure out a way. There was talk last week of structuring it differently as a loan or as something to be paid back. We also have to remember that a large portion of that aid package is to replenish our own military capabilities, our own weapons systems. And that is exceedingly important as we see all of these occurrences all across the world.
So the last time the Senate looked like it might be close on a package that would address all of these things. Basically, between former President Trump and the rebellion in the House, it was a dead letter in the Senate. And the Lankford legislation on the border went down to defeat. How do you think about this when you proceed into, okay, there's strong bipartisan demand for exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. It's not the Senate's job to run the House, but how do you structure that? How do you work through the narrow? You were not just in the House for several terms, but you also held key positions in the House. How do you get that through on the other side? How does Speaker Johnson get that through on the other side?
Well, I think the situation at the border is just untenable. It continues to stun me that the president does not pull back from the executive actions that he did as he first went into office to take down what President Trump could successfully do to pull those numbers down. Remain in Mexico, other kinds of issues, faster asylum claims, stop using blanket parole would be a good start. The president could do that right now. And I think that's part of the reason that the very important border policy changes that were in the original Senate, that were attempted to be in the original Senate bill, are still very, very key. But there's also a growing skepticism as to whatever is in the law, will this president actually follow the law? Because he's not doing that right now. We see every month more and more month records are being set. And February is a good example of that. We see what happened in Texas with the overrun of the Texas National Guard. We see crime around the country, and we see really a country that's so frustrated with this because we know it reaches every single small town. West Virginia is no different. We've got a drug problem with the fentanyl coming up through the border. I think it just stuns Americans that the president will not and has not done what he can do right now.
So I've been covering you since you were in the state legislature. I've got my blue and gold tie on today in recognition of the 35th state. And I know you like to legislate. I know you're good at it. I know that this is something that you excel at. But you've got to be frustrated 6 months into the federal fiscal year, finally passing the second half of the package. This doesn't feel like any way to run a railroad. Does it just, I mean, it must be exasperating to some degree.
It is exasperating because we have to face the reality of where we are. I mean, as Republicans, we have certain leverages, but what we don't have is the United States Senate and the President of the United States in our party. Those are pretty key elements if you're going to ever move anything across the finish line and enact legislation. One of our principal responsibilities is to fund the government. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and it is very frustrating that we had bills out in July out of our bipartisan, out of our Senate committee, and Chuck Schumer refused to put 9 of those up onto the Senate floor. He's had 9 months to do that and would not do that. And so that tells me the most important thing we can look forward to is retaking the Senate in 2024, because then I think we have a much better chance of having a more functional appropriations. We can make
speaking
cuts.
Of 2024,
we can direct funding.
Speaking of 2024,
yes.
Leadership changes are coming, and you are in the running to replace Joni Ernst as Senate GOP policy chair. Your party's leader, Mitch McConnell's departure, is having sort of a chain reaction. But who do you want to see replace McConnell? How do you look at that race for leadership?
Well, as we know now, the 2 Johns are in there, John Cornyn and John Thune, and they're both wonderful, not just members, but people very deep in policy. It's going to be a tough choice. I think there's lots of time to figure it out. I'm not putting my foot on the scale for anybody, but I certainly see different strengths with them. But I think unifying us, listening to members, and also one thing that Mitch McConnell does not get the credit for, besides being a good leader, is he is willing to take an arrow for every single one of his members. And that's what a good leader has to do. And so that's how you get party unity. And you have thin margins. Hopefully we'll be in charge. Thin margins, we're going to need a strong leader.
All right. If you were from Jane Lew, you'd know her already, but there she is, Senator Shelley Moore Capito. We thank you for your time. Okay.
All right,
coming
thanks.
up.
And good luck to the Mountaineer basketball, the girls. They're playing tomorrow night.
There you go. There you go. Agree.
Yeah.